Hi, friends. Here at Beyond the Crucible, we often get a chance to dive into some of the hardest moments of someone's life. Everything from facing loss to trying to find your purpose in life. This summer, we've been working extremely hard to pull together a full e-course, our first, filled with more than 3 hours of lessons learned on how you can find and fully embrace second act significance. To gain access to this course, visit secondactsignificance.com. That's secondactsignificance.com. Now, here's today's podcast episode. Well, welcome, friends, to Beyond the Crucible, the podcast on which we discuss some of life's most devastating, challenging events and circumstances. We call them crucible experiences, and we talk about them to offer hope and healing that, as painful as they may be, they are not the end of your story. In fact, they can be the beginning of a new chapter of your story filled with purpose and, yes, with joy. You have joined us in the midst of our special fall series, Gaining from Loss. For the next several weeks, we will be talking with guests who have experienced trauma and tragedy, but have also embarked on journeys of hope and healing. I'm Gary Schneeberger, the co-host of the show. Our host and guide is Warwick Fairfax, the founder of Beyond the Crucible, who has himself gained much from loss, which gives him both insights into and compassion for others who have walked and are walking a similar path. Warwick, this is another case of having a remarkable guest with much to share to our listeners and encourage them as they move beyond their losses, don't we?
Absolutely, Gary. Very much looking forward to it.
That guest listener is Kayla Stoecklein. And I've learned something fascinating about introducing guests on the Gaining from Loss series, and that's this. Be as non-descriptive as possible in the intro, because I don't want to take from them the ability to tell their stories. I don't want to tell their stories of loss, or as in my old journalism business, I don't want to steal their lead. I want them to be able to tell the story. So I will say only this about Kayla, which is interesting, because this is how Kayla describes herself on her website. Kayla Stoecklein is an author, a speaker, and a mental health advocate, spreading awareness and offering hope. And Warwick, I know from the conversations we've had about this interview before this interview that Kayla has indeed spread awareness and offered hope to you as you've read her book and sort of dived into her story, right?
It's very true, Gary, and Kayla. Again, thank you so much. I just loved reading your book, Rebuilding Beautiful, and it's worth really stating exactly what you have on the front cover of this book. It says, "Welcome, what is, dare to dream again." And after Rebuilding Beautiful, the title, it says, "And step bravely into what could be." I like to think I'm a reasonable writer, but I've got to say this was superbly written, deeply profound, moving. And we'll get into what your loss was. My loss was very different. As listeners know, a loss of a 150-year-old family business. And yes, there was mourning, there was grief. Very different. You can't compare crucibles. But so much, if not all of the book, even though I haven't suffered your loss, I deeply related to. I mean, it was just profound, overwhelming. It was a gift to be able to read this. And obviously, we don't know each other. I'm not somebody that says things if I don't mean it. So I'll just be nice and say, thank you. It was an interesting book. I don't know what I'd say, but I wouldn't say what I just said. You know, I don't believe in being nasty, but I don't believe in false praise. So this really was a gift to be able to read this. And I got a lot out of it from my own personal loss situation. So before we get to the loss, tell us a bit about Kayla Stoecklein growing up, your family, just what was life like pre-loss? You know, So I know you grew up in Southern California, I believe. So just tell us about what life was like for Kayla growing up.
Yeah, I've lived in Southern California my whole life, still live in Southern California. And growing up, had an older sister, parents who were married, grew up going to church every Sunday. It was a huge part of my upbringing and had a great suburban middle class upbringing. Yeah, no complaints.
Okay, okay. That's good. I mean, it sounds like, without dwelling in it, just in your book, there were some sort of challenges. I know you went to was it Vanguard, a small Christian college, and some challenges growing up. So, I mean, every family has its challenges, but it does sound like life was pretty good. So, what were your dreams kind of growing up? Pre meeting Andrew.
I think every little girl dreams of one day getting married and being a mom and having a family. And so I think I held tightly to those dreams. And I always knew I wanted to work as well. And so I didn't never really knew what that would be, but I was excited to go to college and figure it out. I think I changed my major 3 or 4 times and still ended up with a degree that I don't even use. But yeah, I think there was a covering over my childhood, and I had a great upbringing, and my parents did the best with the tools that they had been given and the families that they were raised in. And they did get divorced when I was a senior in high school, and kind of led me into this new journey where I really felt like I was on my own at 18 years old and left home and never went back. And I met my husband sophomore year of college. I was a sophomore, he was a junior, and we fell in love really fast. There's a saying at Christian colleges, ring by spring. And I had that ring by spring. We were engaged when I was, goodness, I think I was 20 years old. We got engaged, and 21 when we got married. He was 22, and we just started our lives, and he was called to ministry. So I was excited to learn how to be a pastor's wife and learn the ins and outs of ministry. And I'd grown up in the church, but I had no idea what it meant to actually be on staff and lead a church. And so I was eager to learn and excited to do it all with him.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that. I have 3 adult kids, like 31 into 20s. They all went to a Christian college, Taylor University in Indiana, which is very missional, wonderful place. But none of them either gave or got a ring by spring. So it's like we were hoping. But hey, given that my dad was, married 3 times, my mother twice, and I was from the last marriage of each, I said, you want to find the right one who's, obviously from my perspective, is a person of faith, and also, it's good to be cautious, but, maybe I gave too much of the caution sermon. I don't know. But yeah, it didn't happen to my kids, but that's all good. So so you got married to Andrew, and from what I understand, his dad was a pastor of a pretty big church in Southern California, and then he became lead pastor when his dad passed away. And so, it sounds like, I'm sure no church is perfect, but it sounds like it was a great church. And being a pastor's wife is not easy. Lead pastor's wife, everybody thinks you're meant to be this role model, and, you're human, you're doing your best, and a lot of stress and pressure. So just talk about, I know Andrew obviously had his challenges. So talk about what life was like pre-loss, just being married, you began to have small kids, pastor's wife. What was life like for Kayla in that season of life?
Yeah. Like I said, we got married very young and just went straight into ministry. And his parents had started the church when Andrew was 3 years old. And so he had grown up in it. It was like the 4th sibling, part of the family. They all just deeply loved the church and cared for the church. And so Andrew was on staff as the creative arts director when his dad was diagnosed with leukemia in 2011. We were only married for a year. Andrew was 23 years old, and he just totally stepped up in a million ways and was preaching regularly on Sundays And there were a lot of Saturdays as well where his dad modeled for him that you show up and speak on Sunday no matter what. As best as you can, you show up and speak on Sunday and don't let anything get in the way of that. And so even while his dad was sick and battling leukemia, we were recording message series from the hospital room. He would show up and be wheeled onto the stage in his wheelchair. He just tried his best to still lead the church through his pain. And that was modeled for Andrew. And so Andrew did the same. He led the church through his pain and through the loss of his dad. His dad passed away in 2015, and his dad was his mentor. His dad was his hero. His dad was his best friend. And so it really was a catastrophic loss for Andrew. And I don't think Andrew really took the time he needed to take to grieve that loss. He took like 2 weeks off and then went straight back to work and preached an incredible series on heaven. And his heart was for the church. He wanted to lead the church through their pain. And it was modeled to him that you just keep going. And so he just kept on going. And we kept on having babies. We had our first boy in 2012 and our next boy a couple years later and our third boy a couple years after that. And so our home life was also very busy. You don't really find rest at home when you work all day and you come home to toddlers and babies. But life was full and it was good and it was beautiful and it was meaningful. And I found so much purpose in supporting Andrew and being a pastor's wife and being a stay-at-home mom and supporting the women's ministry and supporting the MOPS ministry. And it was a really beautiful, meaningful life. And on paper, I think Andrew and I both had everything we could have ever asked for and more. He was in his lead role at the church. I was married to this very successful, handsome, driven guy. I had the mom car. We had the beautiful home. We had the 3 beautiful blue-eyed boys. Like, life wasn't easy, the pressures of ministry and the learning curve of ministry is huge. We had a lot to learn. Andrew was very young, and I think he felt like he had a lot to prove and big shoes to fill, his dad's shoes to fill. And so we were really young, had a lot to learn, and then burnout happened.
So talk about that, because obviously that's a bit of a backstory to the loss.
Yeah.
Anxiety, burnout. Tell us about that, and I'm sure you've thought about it a massive amount, and I don't know how much of that was related to his dad dying so young and Andrew being so young and just the expectations and the family business in a sense, except this is for the Lord. And I have a feeling that probably played a factor in some of the challenges. So talk a bit about pre-loss, just some of those challenges Andrew faced in that period.
Totally. Andrew felt the pressure to carry the mantle of responsibility at the church for sure, took that very seriously. And also, I think he felt the pressure to carry his family. He was the oldest son in the family. And so he felt this pressure to take care of his mom and to help take care of his sister and his brother and also our little family that was growing. And I think all of the pressure, the years of just like running fast and running hard and not stopping and never grieving the huge loss that he had, I think all of that just totally caught up with him. And he started experiencing panic attacks in the fall of 2017. And that was the first just warning sign of something's not right. And it's like, I describe it as we have like this dashboard and then the lights start going off. Like, it's time to get your oil changed. It's time to pull over. It's time to check the brakes. And I think some of those lights started going off on Andrew's dashboard. And at first we thought, Andrew had just shown up and done so much and he was like a superhero in all of our eyes. And so we just all assumed he was capable, he could handle it. He had done it, he would continue to do it, and nothing was going to get in his way of his calling. And so at first we thought, well, maybe it's just like a thyroid problem. He had a thyroid problem in high school. And so we thought, you know what, we'll just like go see a doctor, get some medication. I'm sure the panic attacks will go away. So we kind of shrugged it off like no big deal. But the panic attacks kept getting worse and worse and worse. And it got so bad that he ended up in the hospital in April of 2018. So he had suffered for over 6 months from these panic attacks that were very debilitating, happening 3 to 4 times a week. And he was still showing up and preaching on Sunday. There was even a Sunday, it was Easter Sunday in 2018. And he had a massive panic attack in the bathroom, in the offices, right before he was supposed to be on stage to preach. And somehow, some way, he got on stage, he worked through it, and he's on stage speaking. I'm in the green room crying, and I'm like, what in the world is happening? Like, what are we doing? What are we sacrificing for the sake of the church? And is it worth it? And so the following week, he landed in the hospital. And that's when we said, like, enough is enough. Something's going on here. These panic attacks aren't going away. It's not a thyroid issue. Like, what is happening? And so we all decided, Andrew agreed, that it was time for him to take a sabbatical. And his sabbatical had no end date. Really and truly, the lead staff at the church and the board of directors told him, take as much time as you need. And our family was telling him the same thing, take as much time as you need. And that was really hard for a guy that's very driven for success, that loves his job, that deeply, deeply loves the church. I think it was really hard for him to stop, to give himself permission to rest and to heal. And so we went on the sabbatical in 2018. And just a few weeks later, we were sitting in a psychiatrist's office, and he was diagnosed with depression. And we all were able to connect all the dots, and it just made sense for him. And I was a little surprised, and I'll never forget sitting there, and I had nothing to say. The doctor looked at me and said, your husband has depression. And I was like so shocked and so stunned that I didn't say anything. And then we walked out to the car and got into the car, and I turned and looked at Andrew, and I said, how did we end up here? I was just so shocked and so surprised, and it really caught me off guard. And I just never thought, when I married this guy, 21 and 22 years old, I never thought depression would be a part of our story. But Andrew and the doctors were both very confident that he was on the low end of the spectrum, and that with rest and medication and time off work, that he would be back to himself and back to work in no time. And so we took the sabbatical very seriously. We were seeing a therapist together for 2 hours every single week. He was seeing a psychiatrist every other week. He was taking medication for the depression and anxiety. He was spending time with mentors. We went on a 2-week road trip, just the two of us, to spend time on our marriage. We had people over to pray over our home, to pray over him. Like, we were coming at it from every angle and really, truly doing everything we could to help him rest and heal. And by the end of the summer in 2018, the doctors thought he was getting better, and Andrew thought he was getting better. And so they thought the next right step in his healing journey would be to go back to work. And so he went back to work August 1st, 2018, and hit the ground running, and gave 2 powerful weekend messages on the topic of mental health. And he talked about his journey with depression. He talked about suicide. He gave out the suicide hotline number. He quoted statistics from the NAMI website. Out of anybody, he would have known where to go for help. He had the resources. He had the phone numbers. He would have known where to go. And then headed into the 3rd weekend, he was ready for Sunday. We had a big volunteer team rally we were supposed to have that Friday night. So he was looking forward to that. And, his mind was still very fragile. He had told our family and told our staff that he was at about 65% when he went back to work, and was hoping to ease back into ministry over time. But anybody in ministry could probably tell you it's really hard to ease back into ministry. Ministry is a full-on thing, just this full-on beast of itself. And so he had a really bad day in the office that week, and his fragile mind just could not process some of the information that he received at work. And he just spiraled. And the spiral was big enough and loud enough for our lead staff and for our family to say, whoa, 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 whoa. This guy is much sicker than I think we realized, and maybe he wasn't ready to go back to work, and maybe we need to take some more steps for his healing, and maybe he needs to go to an inpatient facility. Maybe he needs to, take a longer sabbatical. Maybe he needs, I don't know what he needs, but maybe he needs more time. And so while we were away from him the following day for just a little bit, taking some of those next steps. We were getting a guest speaker for Sunday. We were making a team for that. We were making a plan for that team rally that was supposed to happen that evening. We were calling other pastors, asking questions, picking their brains on inpatient facilities while we were away from him, making a plan to take care of him, to take care of his mind and take care of his health. He attempted suicide, and it was an absolute blindside. We had no idea how sick his mind really was, how big his pain truly was, and we just had no idea. And so he was rushed to the hospital, and they ran a bunch of tests on his body, and the doctors delivered the most horrific news that there was nothing that they could do to save his life. And so on August 25th, 2018, he took his last breath. And with that, I took my first in this very unexpected life as a widow at 29 years old with 3 little boys that were 2, 4, and 5.
I mean, it's probably hard for listeners to get their hearts around what you just have said. I mean, obviously, you've found miraculously a way to move forward, but in those weeks and months after, you obviously do a lot of gut churning reflection. What did we miss? What did the doctors miss? What could we have done? A swirl of questions and what could I have done better, to a swirl of anger, whether it's at God, doctors, people at church, whoever. It's like, couldn't somebody have done something, to maybe anger at Andrew? Why couldn't you have taken care of yourself, or, years ago? Or talk about some of the swirl of emotions in those weeks and months after, because I'm sure it was just, I can't think of the word to describe it. Just horrific is an understatement. Mm-hmm. But what was some of the swirl of emotions and thoughts in those weeks and months afterwards?
It's a sea of woulda, coulda, shouldas when somebody dies by suicide. You're just surrounded and engulfed in a sea of coulda, woulda, shouldas, because the truth is anybody that loved him and knew him would have done anything in their power to save him. We just had no idea how bad it really was. And I often describe his death like a child drowning in a swimming pool at a birthday party. Like, he was really, truly surrounded by people that loved him, and we just had no idea he was drowning. We had no idea how bad it really was. And it took me a long time. It took me a long time to let go of some of those regrets, to work through some of those regrets and the things that I missed. One of the main things I missed, Andrew did talk about suicide, and there was a conversation that we had at our kitchen counter a few months before he died. And he was telling me he was up in the middle of the night and he was struggling with suicidal thoughts. And I just totally did not take him seriously and reacted out of my own exhaustion. It was a really hard summer on my end as well. I was caring for our 3 boys while he rested, and they're home for the summer. So that was a full-time gig, and also trying to care for him and living with an unpredictable spouse. His depression, I never knew what version of Andrew I was going to get coming out of the bedroom in the morning, if he was going to be happy or sad or angry or exhausted, if he would spend the whole day in the bedroom, or if he'd spend time with us. Like, I just never really knew what I was going to get. And so I was exhausted and isolated in my own ways. And his therapist described that I was also co-burdening his depression. So I was carrying his depression with him. And so in that moment, when he told me he was struggling with suicidal thoughts, I wasn't able to respond with a heart of love. I just totally reacted out of my own exhaustion and emotion and said all the things you're not supposed to say to someone that's struggling with suicidal thoughts. And so I had to work through that. And part of working through that for me was writing and sharing all the things I did wrong and the things that I wish I would have said. And I wrote a whole blog about the things that I wish I would have said. And when somebody tells you they're struggling with suicidal thoughts, it's time to lean in. It's time to ask questions like, do you have a suicide plan? What problem are you trying to solve through suicide? Do you know when and how you would do it. How often do you think about it? It's time to take it seriously. I should have picked up the suicide hotline. I should have picked up my phone and called the suicide hotline number, or texted the crisis text line, or called his therapist and his psychiatrist and two of his best friends and his family members and told them, hey, this is serious. Hey, this is much scarier and much worse than we thought it was. And his life is actually in danger, and he's, contemplating suicide. I just had no idea how bad it really was. And I really, truly believed it would never happen. And I know I'm not the only one that has had that experience. I know for many of us, we don't know what to do with the word suicide. We don't know how to respond to the word suicide. We don't even know how to say the word suicide out loud. The truth is, the word suicide made me feel so uncomfortable, and I didn't know what to do with it. And so I just totally ignored it and never brought it up again. And looking back, I wish I would have asked him about it every single day. I wish I would have asked him, are you struggling with suicidal thoughts today? What does that feel like? How can I help you? I wish I would have told his psychiatrist and his therapist that he was struggling, but I had no idea. There's a huge learning curve when it comes to mental health, and everybody's mental health journey and journey with depression or suicidal ideation or whatever the diagnosis may be is so unique to that individual. And so I think Andrew was even lost within himself. I don't think Andrew even fully understood what was really going on in his own mind. And his psychiatrist said something to us after he passed away that was really helpful, that I've held on to. He told us that 90% of suicides are impulsive. And so it's this in the moment, overwhelming flood of pain, and pain that many of us are incapable of understanding unless we've lived it, unless we've been there, unless we've been that close to the edge. There's an author, Ann Voskamp, and she wrote a blog about suicide, and she described it as being trapped in a burning building, and the only way to escape the flames is to jump from the window. And so I really, truly have no idea, what those final moments were like for Andrew. I have no idea what it must have felt like to live with the pain he was living with. And so at the end of the day, there's so much grace for him. There's so much grace for me and the things I didn't understand and the things that I've missed. And I've made so much peace with that, and just had to let go of those would have, could have, should haves in order to move forward and rebuild a brand new life without him.
What you just said about grace being threaded through life, there's a line that you've said, loss gives us new eyes to see the grace threaded through all humanity. That we've called this series Gaining from Loss, which can, in some people's eyes, be a little controversial. How can you gain from loss? But that is one thing for sure, right? That you have gained in the way that you live your day-to-day life through loss, is that you have received new eyes to see the grace that is threaded through all humanity, right?
Right. Yeah. It's given me so much compassion and empathy, and my pain has given me access to this deeper stream of humanity that I never had access to before, because I'd never experienced that kind of pain before, that kind of loss before. And so, it's like when you're the person walking around the grocery store with unseen pain, it makes you realize that there are thousands of other people walking around the grocery store with unseen pain, and that you are not the only one going through something difficult, there's tons of other people going through very similar things and grieving very similar losses and walking through their own, prescription of pain. We all have our own prescription of pain, and we're all going through, or have just gone through, or are just about to go through something difficult. And so it has, it's totally given me empathy and compassion and grace for the grumpy person at the cash register at the grocery store, for the grumpy mom on the sidelines of the soccer field, for the stranger that cuts you off on the freeway. It's like grace upon grace upon grace upon grace. We truly have no idea what it's like to walk in anybody's shoes but our own.
That's so profound. I think one of the things I'm guessing you must have had to deal with is forgiveness of Andrew, of yourself. It's easy for outside people who haven't gone through this to say, well, how many of us are experts in suicide? We don't study it. We don't take courses, because there's a lot of things we could do, in terms of I don't know, take a lot of courses about what happens if a kid falls in a pool and is about to drown, or what happens if there's all sorts of things you could prepare yourself for, but it just seems so abstract. So yeah, I've got 3 young kids to take care of. I don't really have time to read and take courses and all that. And so it's almost impossible to really know how bad it is until it is. And as that psychologist said, or psychiatrist, if it's an impulse, even if you were an expert at everything, it may not have made a difference.
Yeah.
So how did you come to peace with both forgiving yourself, others, God? How did you, because I would have thought one of the key steps to moving beyond, as you call it, the pit, your worst day, is that sense of forgiveness. How did you manage, you must have, given where you are now, how did you manage to do that? Mm-hmm. Forgive yourself, Andrew, and the world, everybody?
I think it's an ongoing process. I think it took me years to forgive Andrew, to forgive myself, to forgive the team that was surrounding him. I think it takes, embracing every sharp edge of our pain. It takes allowing our pain to transform us and teach us, and allowing ourselves to feel everything we need to feel and work through those feelings of anger, work through those feelings. For me, my loss and my grief brought me all the way to the edge of myself, and I struggled with my own suicidal thoughts, which gave me even greater empathy and compassion for Andrew. And I've even changed my language and the way that I talk about suicide. And before Andrew died, I would have said things like committed suicide, and now I say died by suicide. I don't use the word committed, because committed is a word we attach to phrases like committed a sin or committed a crime or committed a murder. And all it does is heap further shame and blame onto the shoulders of the person who died. And even that small shift in language has changed everything for me. And it's given me compassion and empathy for Andrew. Even that phrase alone extends forgiveness to Andrew. And that phrase alone, too, will change the way that my boys grieve this loss. And I hope that they're able to discover that same empathy and compassion and forgiveness for their dad that I've been able to discover as well. And really, truly believing that the suicide isn't anybody's fault, that it wasn't my fault. It wasn't Andrew's fault. It wasn't the doctor's fault. It wasn't the church's fault. At the end of the day, it's a horrific tragedy and no one is to blame. And I think it takes a long time to get there. But I think when we do get there, we're set free. I think unforgiveness keeps us in chains. And when we're able to make peace with our circumstances, when we're able to make peace with what happened, we're set free.
I want to, again, forgive me for being a broken record, but what you said is, again, just so profound about embracing the pain. And I want to pivot as you both unpack your story as well as talk about lessons that listeners can learn from your story. Pain breeds a lot of reflection. There can be wisdom from pain, the most unwelcome wisdom you want, but you're gifted that. To use your words, it's a sacred gift, which I love that phrase. So you have several sections in the book, in this new book, Rebuilding Beautiful, which again, I love the title. That's such a magnificent phrase. Embrace, heal, explore, dream, live. That first one, embrace, about embracing your pain. And let me just interject for a second. What's fascinating about this is I identify with this book so much, but yet I haven't had this kind of a loss. I met my wife, who's American, in Australia. We've been married over 30 years. And every day I say, thank you, Lord. And I don't take that for granted at all, ever, especially with my dad being married 3 times, my mother twice. I'm very familiar with the consequences of divorce, which is horrific, certainly on the kids. But yeah, all of the things you talk about, and again, I don't want to take up your time, but just so the listeners understand that even if you haven't lost a spouse, you might have had other kinds of loss. Maybe you're dealing with a Parkinson's diagnosis. We've had people on the podcast with that, or a loss of a limb, a loss of, there's all sorts of losses that are horrific and tough to get over. And so the circumstances are different, but the pain might feel, I don't know if you can say it's equal, the pain. I have no idea what that means, but it's certainly deep. I don't know, for me.
I'll jump in here, Warwick.
Please go ahead.
And I'm going to do what you may not do and ask you, because you've said it to me, right? You
Sure.
read Kayla's book, and
Sure.
each one of the points that you were reading through, you felt that experience yourself from your own crucible experience of losing the family media dynasty. I mean, it is applicable.
Sure.
The truths that she speaks are applicable in how you do that. So I just want to make sure that I
Sure.
sort of tap you on the shoulder and make sure that you share that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So just briefly, because I don't want to take away from you, Kayla, and your story and wisdom, but yeah, I mean, for me, growing up in this 150-year-old family media business, was founded by a person of very strong faith, as strong a businessman for Christ as I've ever come across. There was this history of service to the community. You know, we had the equivalent of the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post in our country. I grew up in this very wealthy family business, dedicated my whole life to going in that, did my undergrad at Oxford, Wall Street, Harvard Business School. It was all about duty and service to the country, and didn't matter if that was my vision, it was my duty kind of thing. So maybe Andrew felt it was his duty to go into his family business in a sense, the church. Nothing wrong with that, but then when it did the $2 billion takeover and it fell out of control, family control, under my watch, it wasn't just a business. I felt like I betrayed my dad, my ancestor, this sacred cause. I wasn't clinically depressed. I wasn't suicidal. I didn't ideate that way, but I was not in a good place because I just kept crucifying myself. Like, how could I have been so dumb? I had a Harvard MBA. How could I have made such stupid assumptions? Look, I've caused animosity amongst my family. I don't try to hurt anybody. I'm not that kind of person. So, but just trying to understand the pain, trying to understand what happened, and gradually trying to forgive myself, which was years and years. And every once in a while I fall off the wagon and have a unforgiving thought to myself. But yeah, I mean, just, it can be a sacred gift. And you're right. It does give you compassion. It has, I'm empathetic by nature, I like to think, but it has increased my compassion and not judging other people, and pain for a purpose. And so, I could go through every single chapter of your book and describe how it relates to my loss. Mm-hmm. And that's the universality of what you've written, Kayla, is it's not just about, suicide. It's about loss in general. And this is just profound. I mean, as I said, I could go on forever about what it means to me. But the first section is embrace. I love, embrace the friction, or as you colorfully say, embrace the suck. Very, very to the point. Don't run away. I mean, there's a lot of shaking off the shame. I mean, what would you say is in terms of embracing the loss, what's the most profound thing? Because you have a lot of thoughts in those three chapters.
There's a quote by the author Jerry Sitzer. It's a beautiful quote. And he wrote a beautiful book called A Grace Disguised that I would highly recommend to anybody that's going through a season of grief. And in this quote, he was having a conversation with a friend and describing what it looks like to go through pain and to go through loss and to feel everything you need to feel. And in this conversation, they were talking about what that is. And they were talking about the quickest way to reach the sunrise, the quickest way to get through what you're going through isn't to head west chasing the sunset, but it's to head east, plunging into the darkness until you reach the sunrise. And so I think that embrace part for me has been that deep dive, that plunge, that willing to go head first into the trauma and the pain, willing to show up for the hard work of healing, willing to feel everything we need to feel. I think so often in Western culture in America, we don't like to feel pain. We don't like to feel uncomfortable. We like to avoid pain at all costs. We like to numb our pain at all costs. I know, I could have walked into a psychiatrist's office and walked out with a giant bag full of prescriptions because of the things that I've gone through. It would have been very easy for me to do that. And not that that's wrong. I think medicine is incredible and healing can be a beautiful gift to people that are struggling. But for me, I saw what the medication did to my husband. And so I wanted to go on this journey of healing as natural as possible and as holistic as possible. And I'll never forget sitting in the therapist office and explaining to her, like, this hurts like hell. Like, when is this not going to hurt as much as it hurts? Like, I don't want to get up and live with this pain for another day. I want to be out of my body. I don't want to feel any of this. And she looked at me in the eyes with tears in her eyes. I was crying and she had tears in her eyes too, and said, Kayla, the way that you're feeling is exactly how you're supposed to feel. And that was such a gift to me and such an encouragement to me that I didn't need to run away from my pain. I didn't need to run away from the feelings. I needed to allow the feelings to, needed to allow myself to feel the feelings. I needed to allow myself to welcome what is, to welcome the reality of what is and all that was lost, and grieve every single loss. When you lose a spouse, it's like there's a million other losses that I had to grieve, not just the loss of Andrew, but the death of a million little dreams and big dreams that I had of a life with him and what I thought my life was going to look like for the rest of my life. And it's an ongoing grieving process. It's an ongoing embrace. And it really truly is like spreading wide our arms and welcoming every jagged, sharp edge of our story. And I think when we do that, when we allow ourselves to feel it, when we allow ourselves to plunge through the darkness, we really, truly do reach the other side. And for me, it took 3 years. It took 3 years to finally come up for air. It took 3 years to finally see the light again and to really believe that life could be beautiful again and start to see that life could be beautiful again, even if that life was without Andrew.
Again, I have to think of another word other than profound because it just gets annoying
meaningful,
for me to say.
Insightful, meaningful,
Thank you.
Insightful.
There you go. What you just said was so meaningful. I'll save insightful for the next section. Yeah, I mean, in my own, again, you can't compare crucibles, but in my own way, there's no question that embracing your pain, going towards it, not going away from it is the way. I mean, I happen to be by nature, I guess I'm a bit unlike a lot of guys, I'm a very reflective person, hyper reflective. And so, if I'm feeling sad, fearful, I want to know why. I want to talk about it. And fortunately, my wife is a good listener, and we go through it. And the more I understand it, the more I'm able to deal with it. It's definitely helped. Again, it's not a comparison game. I always feel embarrassed talking about it because I can't think of pretty much hard for me to think of any crucible much worse than yours. It's just hard for me to conceive of it. But in my own way, it took me most of the 90s to begin to forgive myself for what happened with the family business. It's still a struggle. And we're talking, the company went under in 1990. This is over 30 years. Not to depress you here, but yeah. You're in much better shape, I think, than I was at your time in life relative to the loss. But again, yours is so much worse, which makes it all the more remarkable where you are now. But a lot of guys in our Western culture, it's like man up. You don't talk about your feelings. Very few guys have had role models and fathers who talk about their feelings. I didn't. So I'm wired differently than some guys, and so I do talk about things. I do talk about it with my wife. My value set and my wiring happen to go together, fortunately, but it's not usual. But yeah, you're right. You cannot find your way out the other side unless you go through the pain. It is so true. I love the phrase you say, our wounds are the way through. It's just so good. So the next step, you talk about kind of healing, because one of the things I know you had to do is find your identity. I mean, it sounds like you're struggling a bit with your identity when you were married to Andrew, and who am I? Am I anybody else other than a pastor's wife? And it was a bit of a challenge in that season, but it probably got even worse once you went. So talk about just, you've embraced the pain, but how do you begin to heal and find your identity?
Yeah, that was a huge, and continues to be, a huge part of my healing journey. And so much of who I was wrapped up in who Andrew was, because he was the lead pastor of our church, because our lives revolved around Sundays, revolved around Andrew. Everything was working towards Sunday. And he was larger than life. He had a big personality. He was very charismatic. He was very intense, very driven, and there really wasn't a lot of room for my dreams or ambitions or ideas in a marriage with Andrew. And so I let go of a lot of that. And that was hard, when we were married, letting go and making peace with like, okay, this is what my life is going to look like. And this maybe isn't what I thought it was going to look like, but this is beautiful too. And I can find purpose and meaning here too. And I did, I found purpose and meaning in the women's ministry and serving in the mom's ministry. And then also just serving Andrew. And I was an excellent pastor's wife. I mean, I really, truly was an excellent pastor's wife and was there in the front row every single Sunday that he was preaching, had our 3 boys with their hair done, ready to go, got there early, got them checked in. And I would bring him lunch in between services. I would have dinner ready for him when he got home, like very intentional. I woke up at 4:30 every morning to spend time on my own, with my Bible and reading and journaling and exercise so that the house could be peaceful and I could be ready for the kids when they woke up. Like if that's what I was going to be called to do for the rest of my life, I was going to do it well. And I found purpose and meaning within it. And it was beautiful. And there was a lot of sacrifice, a ton of sacrifice in that marriage as well. A lot of sacrifice of self, of sense of self, in order to, do this, what felt like this bigger calling, this bigger mission, this calling that was bigger than both me and Andrew, leading a local church, doing the work of God. It's so interesting when your career and your spiritual life collide. And, it's like, it was just like we were serving together, this thing that was so much bigger than us. And that felt like such a huge honor to be able to do that with him. And I was so honored to be his wife and so proud. After he passed away, I had a friend over and we were packing up my house and I was crying. And I said to her, it feels like I'm packing up my pride. Because I was so proud of my life. I was so proud of the life that we had built together. And so after he passed away, it really was this unraveling of, okay, if Andrew's not here anymore, if Andrew isn't leading and driving our family, I kind of describe it like Andrew was in the driver's seat and I was in the passenger seat and I was just like along for the ride and, there to support him however I could and take care of our kids however I could. And after Andrew passed away, life invited me to slide into the driver's seat. And here I am, 29 years old, in the driver's seat with these 3 little boys in the back seat. And I'm looking across the horizon and I'm wondering, where in the world am I going? And I have 3 boys that are sitting in the back seat asking me too, Mommy, where are we going next? And so it's been an adventure trying to answer that question. It's been an adventure unraveling my identity and asking myself, who am I now? And also asking myself, who do I want to become? And it's taken an awakening of some of the interests and hobbies and passions that I had before I was married. It's been like going back to like, what are those things that bring me life? What are those things that I like to do? What are those passions and gifts? And what's my calling, apart from Andrew? What am I called to do? And it's been really fun just to get super curious about the answers to that question. And what I've realized too, in this season of life is that to be human is to step in and out of 100 different versions of self. And the person that I was when I married Andrew was a completely different person than I was leading up to the months when Andrew died. And the person I am today is a completely different person than I was when Andrew passed away. And the person I'll be in 5-10 years is a completely different person than I am today. And so what's been super helpful for me in this season of life is to consider that future self, consider that future version of myself, and get really curious about who they are, where they are, who's by their side, what do they have in their hands, what is the work that they are pouring their life into, and then working towards those goals and beginning to dream beyond the destruction of my reality and taking action on some of those dreams and making some big moves and pushing through fear. I think a lot of it is fear. I think a lot of us can get in our rebuilding journey and our healing journey. I'm sure you experienced this too with your loss. Like, we can get stuck in a cycle of fear, and fear can really stop us from being able to move forward, from being able to rebuild a life that's beautiful. And so it's taken an embrace of even the fear, an embrace of willing to work through the fear and push through the fear to step into the realized dreams. For me, an actual physical move has been a huge part of our healing journey. And I physically moved an hour towards the coast. We live just by the beach now, but an hour towards the coast from where we lived before, in order to have a fresh start, in order to take back the power of our story. Where we live, the church was pretty large, a church about 4,000 people, and my boys were going to a private Christian school. And so a lot of the staff and a lot of the families went to our church and knew my husband. And I felt like all they saw when they saw me was the grieving widow. And I thought for my boys, if we stay here, like, we had a great home, it's a great school, it would have been fine. But I was really curious, what would life look like if we left? What would life look like if we chose to have a fresh start? And so we did. We moved. And really, what I realized when we moved is that we took back the power of our story. And now we get to tell our story on our own terms, to who we want, when we want, how we want. And we get to write a whole new story too. We get to make new friends and find new community and discover who we are here in this new city, in this new community, in this new life. Yeah.
Yeah, I love what you share in this section about finding a new narrative. I mean, in a sense, in the past, you used the phrase, you felt like you were in the passenger seat, not in the driver's seat. And, it's what was, but almost felt like you didn't really completely select the seat you were in. It just happened to you. It wasn't like this conscious, okay, this is my role in life and I feel called. And you didn't really probably had time to think that through, nor would it been helpful. But now you do get to, as you say later, choose your own adventure, which I love that phrase, and create a new narrative. You do get to choose your life. Who is Kayla Stoecklein? What is her vision, dream, identity? You get to choose that, and you say elsewhere that, you're worthy of that. You set new traditions. I mean, moving houses makes sense. I need to do more than that. I had to move countries. I left Australia, which I know you visited Australia, and brave you for doing the bridge climb, Harbour Bridge climb. My boys have done it, I haven't, but well done you. But I couldn't have lived in Australia. It would have been like where you were near, the kids' school and church. It was just, it was just too much. Still to this day, it's not the easiest thing for me to go back. But I love that phrase of new narrative, new traditions. You mentioned about spending Christmas in Colorado and Friday night movie night and all these things that are just the little things, but they're creating a new narrative for you and your boy. So that just seems so wise and so helpful. So as you sort of, and I love the phrase you talk about, sacred scars. So there's so many phrases here that you've written. I've circled too many, so forgive me. Like I love the phrase you have. There's a difference between restoration and redemption. You can't restore what was, but you can redeem it. In my own way, I've tried to redeem what I went through about losing the family business into crucible leadership, beyond the crucible, and I've tried to have redemptive qualities out of the pain. So that's awesomely true. So, talk about as you began to, use your scars, rebuild your life, and explore. One of the first chapters there, you talk about worthy of love. I know for me, I just felt my my go-to is if there's a problem in the world, it's my fault. That's my wiring. So I could have blamed other family members, and wealthy businesses have all sorts of crazy, unhealthy dynamics. So it's more complicated than it was all my fault. But, to be able to move on, yes, you got to forgive yourself and others, but you've got to feel that you're worthy of love, that you're not this waste of space kind of thing. So that is so profound. So talk about how you took some of those first steps into feeling, to use your words, that you're worthy of the beautiful gift of love, and began to just find a purpose and identity for Kayla.
Yeah. Yeah, to go from the safety and covering of a marriage and a worn in love that I shared with Andrew, it's like we had been through so much together that we had this worn in, comfortable love. And then all of a sudden, overnight, becoming a single mom and widow, it's been a journey of answering that question for myself and asking myself, am I worthy of love? What does love look like here? And knowing that first and foremost, I'm deeply loved by God, and that God has taken care of us and continues to take care of us and provide for us. And He has every single step of the way. And then getting curious, like, what does love look like here? And not just romantic love. It's like, how do I find that intimacy and that connection? And friendships with others and community has been a huge part. And allowing others to love me, allowing others to share in my pain has been huge for my healing. I'll never forget, there was a moment that I had with one of my best friends just a few weeks after Andrew had passed away. She was over at my house, and I had just got done putting the kids to bed. And I came out to the living room and I just totally collapsed on the floor. And she came over and she just laid on top of me and wept with me. And I allowed her to love me in that moment. I allowed her to love me without words and to share in my pain without words and just to be with me. And, I think sometimes our pain can isolate us from that love. If we allow it to, our pain can totally make us feel like we're left out or we're unworthy or we're less than. And some of us, end up in a rebuilding beautiful journey and we feel like it's our fault. We feel like it was a series of poor life choices or bad decisions or bad business deals or whatever it may be. We may think that we ended up here and it's our fault. And we can get stuck in that, that sinkhole of shame and pain and feeling totally unworthy of even of a new kind of beautiful life. And so, it has taken just a curiosity of what does love look like here? And how do I allow God's love in? How do I allow the love of others in? And even, for me too, what does romantic love look like here? Do I want that? And getting really curious of, do I want that? What does that look like? And I've explored that a bit. I talked about it in the book a bit about going on dates and trying to figure that out and navigate that. And it's a really strange reality to be 30 years old with 3 little kids and find myself on dating apps again. Like, what does that even look like here? Right. But I know, considering my future self and considering, 45, 55, 65-year-old Kayla and how proud she would be of, I'm 33 today, of 33-year-old Kayla and her willingness to show up and try, her willingness to show up for those dates or show up and try to write the book or show up and try to live in the new city and show up and try to make new friends. Like, I know that 65, 75, 85-year-old Kayla will be so proud of 33-year-old Kayla for being willing to show up and try. And I think that's what it takes to rebuild a new kind of beautiful life. It's just being willing to show up and try the best that we can to make lemonade out of lemons and to create something that's beautiful again in its own unique way. It's never going to be the same beautiful that it was before. My life is never going to resemble the exact same beauty as it did before, but beauty is still possible. And it just looks completely different than it did. And making peace with that and finding my home here. And what does that look like here? And I'm still answering that question.
I'm going to pull a phrase from this prep sheet that you filled out. And it was funny because you sent it to me like 15 minutes before we started, and they're like, "Ooh, I'm a little late." I'm like, "No, you hit deadline. You're fine. Everything's good." And now we're going to use it. So for sure, it's actually good that you filled it out and you hit deadline. But you say this, and it sort of sums up a lot of what you've been saying in the last 5 minutes or so. We ask a question of what advice would you give someone who's gone through a painful loss, what we call the crucible experience. And you say, the first half of what you say is really all you need to say. And you say, allow the crucible to be your greatest teacher. And that's really what you've just described there, right? You allowed that crucible experience and what you learned from it to teach you some things about how you then move forward beyond that crucible, didn't you?
My pain has been one of the greatest teachers of my life and continues to be one of the greatest teachers of my life. And I would have never asked for it or wanted it or signed up for it. But because I've surrendered to it, it really truly has transformed me into a completely different person than I was before Andrew died. And it's given me eyes to see humanity and eyes to see the world in a completely different way than I could before. And I'm so grateful for the lessons that I've learned from my pain and for the wisdom that I've gained from my pain. And for the life experience that I've had and the way that I can love and lean in with other people that are walking through difficult situations in ways that I would have never been able to lean in before. So it truly can. I really, truly believe for all of us, no matter what that pain may be, it can be one of the greatest teachers of our lives if we allow it in and we allow it to transform us.
Again, so I won't say profound, I'll say insightful.
Insightful. There you go. Insightful. Yep.
I have to vary my compliments, but I love what you said earlier and what you're saying now about love, almost sort of this concept of leaning into love. I know for me, as a person of faith also, just this realization that God loves me unconditionally. He didn't need, John Fairfax Limited, the family company, my achievements and what I could or may not have done for the country of Australia, heading up this big media company. I mean, who knows? But just that unconditional love from God, and at least in my case, having a wife who loved me unconditionally and never once said, "Oh, yeah, you're an idiot. How could you have done that?" Mm-hmm. The combination of just love from my wife and unconditional love from God and friends. Not easy. I mean, a lot of guys don't let people in, but I wouldn't say I'm terrific, but certainly with, letting God in, letting my wife in, and then, maybe a few friends, sort of running towards love, learning to be loved, then allows you to love other people, have compassion. If you can't, how can you forgive others if you can't forgive yourself? You can't. And so you got to do the hard internal work, because if you don't, you won't be of any use to your 3 boys in your case or anybody else. So, I know you've given yourself this self-talk many times. Mm-hmm. My boys deserve the best self. If I don't take care of myself, I won't be able to take care of the boys, and I'll be setting them a terrible example, a terrible role model. So and you've given yourself that self-talk, I'm sure, a lot. So, just that is so important to realize that we are worthy of love, whatever spiritual paradigm. And I love what you just said about, just using your crucible in service of others with now your second book, and, you speak. And I love that phrase, choose your own adventure. So as you talk about kind of the adventure that Kayla Stoecklein is in, what's the adventure that you've now chosen? Mm-hmm. A lot of life you didn't choose. Mm-hmm. But now you're in a place where you didn't choose the past, you didn't choose the loss, but you're choosing your own adventure. What's the adventure that you're choosing?
Yeah, I had this moment when I made that big move to the coast, and I was standing in my living room, and I had the Christmas tree on in the corner and the fire going in the fireplace. And I had just got done putting the boys to bed, and I had that moment where I realized I was standing in a life that I chose, and that for the first time in the last few years that I had been walking through this really intense grief and pain, that for the first time it felt like I was standing in a life I chose. And it was so empowering that it brought me to tears. And I was standing in my living room weeping, like, I can't believe that this really horrible, terrible thing happened. And I can't believe how beautiful and meaningful and wonderful my life is too. And that's the duality of walking through something like this. It's like you learn to hold the joy in one hand and you learn to hold the sorrow in the other hand, and moving forward is embracing both. And so I think that choosing my own adventure today is making new memories with my boys, is spending as much time possible with my boys because they're growing up so fast. My oldest is turning 10 next month, and my others are 8 and 6. And I'm just watching them get taller and their voices get deeper. And, they're getting so handsome and big. And I'm realizing like how fleeting it all is. So I think my adventure is right in front of me. It's my kids and this season of life, and trying to soak it up as much as I possibly can, and leaning into this work that I've been invited into as well, and sharing my story and talking about my pain. And I'm really excited for this next season, because I'm going to be taking a sabbatical that I haven't stopped to rest in the last 4 years. And so my next adventure is going to be a sabbatical, and truly taking a break and giving myself a bit of respite, because we can't, for me, I think what I've realized is that I can't keep reliving my trauma, and I can't keep talking about my pain if I'm going to move forward, and I need to give myself a break from doing that. So I'm really excited. And I think rest is spiritual. Rest is talked about all throughout scripture. Even God rested when he made the world, and it's such an important rhythm of life. So super excited for that adventure. I'm taking a whole year off next year.
That is so great, because sometimes, and you write elsewhere in the book, that, there's a tendency to want to live to other people's expectations. It could be a publisher, it could be friends, it could be whoever. But, Kayla, there's so many people hurting, and, your message could save a life. And I don't know, there's all sorts of talks. Some are probably pretty unhelpful, but people are human and they probably give it. And how can you take a sabbatical? Because the world needs Kayla Stoecklein. It's like, you probably say, oh, sorry, have to find somebody else for the next year. There got to be other people that can offer something hopeful and helpful other than me. If there's not, oh, well, not my problem. Go talk to God and maybe he'll figure something out. But yeah, I love this phrase you use, defiant joy. And one of the things I'm curious about is, as you're rebuilding your life, the sorrow never totally goes away, but as you see hope in your life, do you ever have times in which you feel guilty? Like, oh, it's wrong for me to be happy, or in your worst moments, do you ever have to fight that and say, like, I'm sure, Andrew up in heaven, he's not against you finding joy, right? He would be the first one to champion you, say, this is great, Kayla, go for it. But how do you, because I've got to thought from time to time, do you feel, gosh, on your happy days, do you feel guilty about being joyful and happy?
I think maybe at the beginning I did, but I would say today, over 4 years later, I don't. It's just like so commingled, my grief and my pain and my sorrow. I've learned to live with it, and it's just like this sacred wound that I will have for the rest of my life, and this sacred part of me. And so, having joy and happiness and gratitude is a beautiful gift, and just wanting to be as present as possible to the gifts that surround me every single day. And I know now not to take any of it for granted, and that it really truly all is, the gift of this moment right now is a beautiful, sacred gift. And I don't feel guilty for having joy anymore, but I think that was something that I had to work through.
Well, that's
erudite.
I almost, yes, no, I was going to say praise God, because that feels like a bit of a miracle. That's amazing that you would say that. So that is, and mean it. I think that's just wonderful. As we're kind of, beginning to sum up, I love what you just said about gratitude. It is so true. Gratitude is empowering. It is freeing. It's hard to feel sad when you're grateful. Obviously, certain sadnesses you got to deal with appropriate mental health steps. But there's not one day that I don't say, I'm thankful for my kids, in my case, my wife, and having had a dad that was married 3 times and a mother twice, I know the other path. I don't take that for granted at all, ever. So 3 kids who, love the Lord. I mean, I have the ability to do what I do. The Lord has provided me some financial flexibility. So I have a long list of things to be grateful for. And grateful is very empowering and uplifting. I mean, people do gratitude journals. There's tons of books on gratitude, many of them very good, but that is so important. So as you look at what's happened to you, this terrible, I don't know if it's C.S. Lewis. Somebody talked about hard joy. I wish I could think of who said that, but what you've gone through is so unspeakably tough. How could anybody survive it? But you've managed to. What are some of the lessons? I mean, you're living really a life of significance, which we call a life on purpose, dedicated to serving others. You do that every day with your role model, and you speak in your book. And even if you take a sabbatical, your books are still out there. It's going to be helping people. So as you just sum up the trajectory of your life from your loss, how would you kind of talk about what we call your life of significance? You've turned that pain, to me, into a life of significance, a massive life of significance. How would you describe that in your own words?
I think I'm just so grateful to be a part of any of it, and to know that I play a small part in a much bigger story, and that my life is a life of service, and that really my loss has taught me to hold loosely to everything. And so it's like living with unclenched hands, living in surrender, not clinging too tightly to anything, and just being so grateful for the work that I have in front of me today, and knowing that it might be completely different than the work that I have in front of me tomorrow. And just trying to stay as present as possible as I can to the moment, to the calling, to the work, whether it be sitting with my boys at the skate park, or sitting at the beach staring at the ocean, or going on a walk with a friend, or showing up for a conversation like this. I'm just so grateful to be a part of it, and to have a small role to play in the much greater story that God is writing.
Listeners who have been through the 140 some episodes before this one are accustomed to me being a little bit more of a busybody in a conversation than I've been in this one. But I wanted to make sure, Warwick, that you had a chance to truly ask all your questions. But you did raise the idea of we're getting close to the end. So that's my cue to jump in for you, Kayla, and say, how can listeners who have been impacted, who've been touched by what you've talked about, how can they find out more about you? How can they get your books? How can they learn more about you and your journey?
Yeah, I'm most active on social media, on Instagram. My Instagram handle is Kayla Stoeck, and my website is kaylastoecklein.com. And my book is on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, a lot of those places wherever you like to buy books, and also Audible. I was able to record both the audiobooks for both Fear Gone Wild and Rebuilding Beautiful. So that was such a great joy.
And as a guy whose last name is Schneeberger and nobody knows how to spell it, how can people spell Stoecklein so they can find you online?
Yes, it's Stoecklein.
And Kayla with a
K.
There you go. Warwick, I suspect you may have another question or two, and I will leave that to you before I close.
Well, thank you again, Kayla. It's just so inspiring how you've been able to find joy amidst the loss, find purpose. And, I highly recommend the book Rebuilding Beautiful. So many great stories. Didn't have a chance to get to them all. I love the one about your older son Smith and putting the note in the wailing wall, and you put your note in there in Jerusalem, and so many fun stories. Spending time in Australia in the early days. So highly recommend the book. And I think one of the things that Kayla just mentioned, which I think is important, sometimes when you find a calling for your life, you can go all in and, want to do it, 100 hours a week, so to speak, if that was even possible. But you naturally understand the value of balance. A lot of pastors fall into that because they feel like I'm doing God's work, and so their families are neglected. So that was something that's, I believe in working hard, but a balanced life is something that's been really, really important to me. And I don't know, just a thought, it's probably not that profound, but my kids are all grown up. I have 2 boys and a girl, a sort of boy-girl boy. And growing up, I was at their soccer games or dance recitals or tennis and pretty much every single one because I wanted to be present. I didn't want to be like the other Harvard MBAs that I went to school with, just went to reunion actually a couple of weekends ago, who typically work, 12-hour days and never see their kids. And one of the things we do at the dining room table on birthdays is we go around the table, youngest to oldest, saying what we most appreciate about the person whose birthday it is. 2 of my kids are writers, so I guess maybe they got that from my side, and they're very eloquent. They're very specific. So when it's your birthday, buckle up because it's going to be difficult. It's hard to hear detailed praise. But my boys who took after my wife in terms of the athletic genes, because there aren't many on my side of the family, unfortunately, they always joke, well, the bad genes come from dad, the good genes come from mom. But, and there's some truth in that. But my boys, especially with the athletic ones, who said, Dad was always at my soccer game or tennis match. And then now, my boys are 31, 24. Every birthday felt like, as long as they could talk. So we're talking more than 20 years, and, maybe 25 years in the case of my oldest son. So what that means is just showing up matters. So what you're doing and taking a sabbatical, your boys are young, but, you could be around the world giving all sorts of talks, having a big impact, and I'm not telling you what to do. Maybe I am, but I'm all for, it's like evangelism begins at home, as they say. It's like, what will it profit the world if you're, running around speaking everywhere and ignoring your boys? Not that you ever would, but it can be tempting. I could do so much good, but, I think God wants us, the ministry at home is just as important as the other work. So I applaud you for what you're doing. And, it's all of service. It's all of significance, not just what people see. So I don't know whether that's a question or an admonition or a commendation for what you're doing. But any final thoughts as we close here?
No, just thank you so much for having me. And it's been such an honor to be here and to chat with you guys. Thank you. And thank you for the encouragement. It means a lot.
Well, I will have a final thought, but it's not going to be long, listeners, so don't worry. And it's not going to be me. It's going to be, I, like Warwick, have about 150 sheets of paper in which I've taken notes on things that Kayla has written or said. And I'm going to leave you, listener, with one of the things that she's written in her book. And I want you to really listen to it, because what we've just talked about for the last hour or so is a very painful and very dramatic loss, right? The series is called Gaining from Loss. And Kayla has made I'll say it, profound case for what she's gained from her loss. But we're aware the losses that the vast majority, we hope, who are listening have experienced have not been as dramatic. They're still painful, and there's still losses, and there's still great fruit to pull from this conversation with Kayla Stoecklein. And I'm going to leave you with some words that Kayla wrote in her book that you can apply to your own life, regardless of the nature of the circumstances of your loss. This is what Kayla wrote. I know, right, I'm going to back up. We're going to cut this so that it'll come out better. There we go. All right. In the aftermath of a loss, this is what Kayla wrote. We don't have to stay camped out in the cemetery. A beautiful world waits for us on the other side of loss. A world so expansive, it has room for our pain. If I had a mic, well, I do have a microphone, but it's an expensive one. I'm not going to drop it. But that is indeed a mic drop moment from our guest, Kayla Stoecklein. So until next time, listeners, thank you for spending time with us, and we will see you next week.